Coldplay and Muse are two bands that emerged from the UK's alternative rock scene shortly after the time OK Computer came out. Due to their usage of falsetto vocals and similar compositional techniques, they were instantly branded by critics as being watered-down copycats of Radiohead, a comparison that I don't feel is entirely justified. You see, when it comes to creating something, we've all got to start from somewhere, typically by taking influence from the artists we look up to. Through this period of imitation, you can really sort out the kinks in discovering what works for you and what doesn't, the things that make you stand out and the things that you desperately need to refine on. Then slowly, through trial and error and enough dedication, you can hopefully come out of it as a unique voice ready to bring something new to the world of entertainment. Tough luck though if the guys you imitate turns out to be Radiohead, because if you accidentally do a good enough job on your first try, then a bunch of nerds on music forums are going to beat you over the head with comparisons for decades to come, even well past the point where you no longer even sound like fucking Radiohead. Were Coldplay and Muse inspired by Radiohead? Yes. Coldplay found inspiration in songs like High and Dry and Fake Plastic Trees, and Muse likewise in Pearly, The Trickster, and the outro of Exit Music. You know, what's funny is that despite drawing influence from the same band, they each honed in on two very distinct aspects of Radiohead's sound, culminating the three bands into this, British rock band Freudian trio. The angel on Radiohead's shoulders is obviously Coldplay, the soft Radiohead, the mellow and sweet Radiohead, the Radiohead that you can listen to while grandma's around. Meanwhile, the devil on Radiohead's shoulder holds the world record for smashing the most guitars in one tour.
How many guitars have I smashed in my lifetime? I get that question every now and again, and I don't know how it happened, but someone somewhere says we're in the Guinness Book of Records or something.
Yeah, we're in the Guinness Book of World Records or something. It's no big deal.
Again, I think that might be a false meme or
false meme?
Thought contagion. I don't know where it started from, but there might have been one tour where it looked like I smashed a guitar every night, but really what people don't realise is actually my guitars are specially made where they're in two parts, So if I break it and the neck breaks, I just put a new neck on it, The body very rarely breaks, so I've had the same body, but like I say, about 10 different necks on the same thing, It looks like I may have trashed hundreds of guitars, but it's probably only really about 4 and about 20 necks or something like that.
Fuck you. Look, I'll be honest, I'm not really the biggest fan of these guys, but that isn't really the point of the video, so I think we'll just go ahead and move along here. So this would be the part where I start picking off examples from Coldplay and Muse's catalogs and pitting them against Radiohead songs to prove how they aren't the major ripoffs that people accuse them of. But there's no reason to get that analytical, because all this really is just getting hung up on semantics. It's not like people genuinely believe that these bands are set out to copy every single one of Radiohead's moves. It's just a passé, surface-level critique people make to quickly write off a band on the radio that sounds like some other band on the radio. So why even bother? Let's just listen to what Tom York has to say about the whole ordeal instead.
Stanley from Coney Island wants to know how you guys feel about the fact that bands like Travis, Coldplay, and Muse are making a career sounding exactly like your records did in 1997. Good luck, kid A.
Wow. Seriously, dude? Good luck with kid A. The fuck? I think it's very weird. A couple of days ago I saw Muse on MTV, and I really got scared. They really try to look like us, but they didn't seem to enjoy it very much. No way. They impersonated another band on stage and didn't enjoy it very much? Wow. You guys would never. I was wondering too what you think of groups like Travis and Coldplay that obviously have been influenced by you. They're fine, everybody's influenced by everybody else. We steal blatantly, and so why not? But, I don't have their records in my house. Oh hey, that's a pretty reasonable thing to say after you berated them for doing the same things you admitted to doing. And it's not to say that I think these guys are warranted praises from Radiohead. I don't think you owe respect to someone who takes influence from you. But it's pretty fucked up to judge these bands solely on their debut albums and complain that they're stuck in an old sound, as if it's some sort of fucking competition. as if these bands couldn't someday be just as capable as Radiohead to evolve into a new, better sound. And the thing is, neither of these bands shied away from giving Radiohead praises when prompted. They weren't trying to keep it a secret that they were inspired by them. Chris Martin even went as far as saying that he would give his left nut to make an album as good as OK Computer. The same can be said for Muse too. Starting out, they stated that Radiohead were one of the best English bands around, and that the Bends along with Nirvana's Nevermind were two of the most influential albums of the 90s. They even claimed that they were flattered to be compared to Radiohead. But as the comparisons grew more and more abundant and they kept getting asked the same things over and over again, you could tell they were starting to get fed up with it. Fortunately, they handled it in one of the most mature and, least stupid ways possible. They started pettily referring to Radiohead as that band, and attempted to retract on their statements that they were ever that big of an influence to begin with. With the Nirvana and Radiohead thing, what we were actually talking about was the fact that they were probably the two most influential bands of the decade for most bands. Not necessarily for us, they were just the two biggest guitar bands around really. 7 years later in a different interview. When we were 16, Radiohead was one of our major influences. The Bends was my favorite album when I was younger. Dude, fucking Muse, dude. I want to be mad at Radiohead, but they just can't help making me mad at Muse instead. I draw the line at Muse because they openly slag us off as well as openly rip us off. And that's like, how fucking dare you? That's just not cool. That's incredibly bad karma. And he's right. That is bad karma. That's why they made Will of the People. Despite all of that though, Matt did raise a good point where he said there are elements where we've been influenced by a lot of the same things, but not influenced by them. And while I do think that's veering a bit too far in the opposite direction because I mean, come on now, I do agree that the truth in all of this meets somewhere in the middle, where these bands are influenced by Radiohead and Radiohead's influences, if not more so the latter. Tom, Chris, and Matt were all heavily influenced by Jeff Buckley. And if you ask me, I don't think it's that unlikely for three guys from Britain, all influenced by the same singer, to end up singing similarly. Insane conclusion to jump to, I know. In fact, when I try to listen for the Radiohead influences in these guys' music, all I really hear is just three different British bands aping Jeff Buckley. Radiohead just so happened to have done it first though, so they get all the credit. But still, man, they were just total dickheads to these guys for like, literally no reason. And I don't feel it was justified at all either. Especially under the pretense that they were above rock music now upon the release of Kid A, as if they were somehow better than their contemporaries because they started listening to fucking Warp records. You know, speaking of Warp, you wanna know what's the cherry on top to all of this? While Radiohead were trying so hard to look cool in front of Aphex Twin and Autechre Sama, both of those guys could not give less of a fuck about what the transcendental gods of rock music Radiohead were doing with Kid A. Aphex Twin flat out called it cheesy, and after Tom wrote a long heartfelt email to Autechre and asked them to open on their tour, all they said was no. So what do you guys think it is? Was it just happenstance that Radiohead would get their shit attitudes thrown back at them? Or were Coldplay and Muse merely pawns for Radiohead to vent out their frustrations from being rejected by their idols? Whatever the case may be, I for one am flabbergasted that these multimillionaire rock stars didn't act like rational human beings. And with that being said, I should probably clear the air here that none of this is really that serious. I'm merely just exacerbating some minor conflict between musical artists to keep you, the viewer, engaged in pointless drama that happened over 20 years ago, all to make like $50 whole. But the topic of influences and ripoffs is something that I do want to dwell on a bit further. What even separates something from being an influence or an imitation? I know the answer to that should be obvious, but the contention with Coldplay and Muse being ripoffs of Radiohead has made this far more complicated to me than I ever thought about before. Those bands are just influenced by Radiohead to me. I don't hear them trying to emulate Radiohead. I hear them at worst using Radiohead's style as foundation to build their own sound on top of, which is what an influence should be. So why is it that they get reprimanded by critics for doing the same thing that virtually every artist does? Even if they did sound exactly like Radiohead, I can't imagine there being a lot wrong with that given that they weren't acting like it was their own sound. It's not like Radiohead were going to make another OK Computer. In fact, that was probably a selling point for these bands after Kid A came out, which is really the main problem here anyways, the timing of these bands' debuts. Entering the game just a few years after OK Computer makes it really easy to hold you under scrutiny as some shameless corporate cash grab. And I can't help but empathize with these guys, knowing how their careers would progress, that was ever their intention. Whether you like them or not, these guys were yearning for their own creative trajectory to take their art into. You don't have to look further than their sophomore albums to realize that. And when you're in that position, it's a lot harder to mindlessly ape another band because that completely prohibits the ability to insert your own ego into it, to make something as a reflection of yourself or your surroundings. It would just be suppressive. I don't know. Maybe this all hits a little too close to me because I started out this YouTube channel from wanting to make videos just like my favorite creators. There was really nothing more to it than just experiencing this feeling that I watched something super awesome, and wanting to replicate that feeling for some other person in the world. Who's to say that Coldplay and Muse didn't feel the same way too? Chris was willing to sacrifice his balls for this shit, but all Radiohead saw them as was some eager dog yapping at their heels, and they just wanted to kick them away. Yeah, because Coldplay was gonna write the fucking national anthem. I want to make it extremely clear too, in case it somehow comes off this way, that I'm not trying to downplay how ripping something off is undeniably a negative. But if your intention is to eventually evolve from your influences, wouldn't it feel suffocating to constantly be pigeonholed as a ripoff, despite your most earnest efforts? I don't know. I don't even fucking like Muse and Coldplay. I don't know why I just made a whole video defending them.